Hi everyone, it's Laura and I hope you're all doing really well. Today I'm going to be talking through all of the books that I read in the month of May. And I read I read 4 and I half read 1, which I just put down. So I've got a bit of an interesting mix of books in this wrap up today. We'll start with Just Kids by Patti Smith, for which I have had an overwhelming amount of good recommendations for. I've seen it all over BookTube. Even when I mentioned I was about to read it, I had so many people say, "It's my favourite book ever, it's amazing, I hope you really enjoy it." So to say that my expectations were high going into this book may be a little bit of an understatement. I feel like it didn't quite live up to them, which I don't know if it's just not the kind of book that's for me. This is a memoir of Patti Smith's time in New York during the 60s and early 70s and 80s actually, and it follows her life as a teenager running away to New York and her relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe, the photographer, and how they became who they became. Basically, it's a story of their relationship and a story of them being aspiring artists and being very poor, and kind of what the art music scene was like in New York at that time. For me, there were 2 problems with this book. The first one being the sheer amount of name dropping. Patti Smith just lists artists, she lists poets, and some people like Andy Warhol, fair enough, I know who that is, but a lot of people I don't think she really explained fully who they were, what her relationship was like with them, and I don't know if we were just expected to know who these people were, that she was full naming all the time. I felt like the focus of the book was really on her and her relationship with Robert, and which is fair. I mean, that's like I'm criticising a book for what it's literally explicitly setting out to do. But it meant that when she talks about other people helping them out, giving them a place to stay, or giving them a slot at an open mic night or something like that, I felt like I didn't know who these people were. When she had other boyfriends, and even when she, when she marries someone, I feel like I didn't understand her relationship with that person at all. I felt like it was difficult to empathise with her and with them, with their whole situation, without understanding their full social circle. And the second issue that I found when reading it is that I feel like to Patti Smith and to Robert and everybody else in this book, it was very obvious why they had no money and why they were being artists. And to me, I felt like I don't understand why you would do this to yourself. Like, I don't understand why you don't just get a job. And I do feel like that's to do with me and my perspective of life. I just don't understand why you would want to be in New York as a really young teenager, literally be homeless, sleep around for money, like have no food, and just think, oh, this is how I want to live my life. Like, it didn't really seem obvious to me, because I feel like Patti did have a really supportive family, so it's not like she needed to run away, she just didn't want to be there. And I feel like she presents their whole lives as this really noble artistic struggle which was going to change the world and was really important, and I just don't think that was clear to me. I didn't really understand that it was really imperative that they nearly kill themselves in order to be artists, and even to the point where I didn't feel like they necessarily wanted their work to be in galleries, because that was like selling out, and I just felt like, oh my god, like, how are you gonna live? The flip side of that was that I actually found it quite inspiring the way they were just creating, and Patti Smith wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, I'm gonna be a punk rocker. That was like never on her periphery. She was being a poet, and she was drawing, and she was interested in art, and like Robert Mapplethorpe wasn't really initially into photography. He was doing other kinds of different artworks and collages and things, and I enjoyed that perspective on the idea of creativity, this idea of just making things, just creating things, not necessarily pursuing them as a career or turning it into a hustle, which I think is a very modern perspective that we have, that you've got to be making money out of everything, and everything's got to be focused on your ultimate goal and your ultimate dream career. Whereas for these guys, that kind of fame and that kind of career did happen, but it happened very messily, and it happened because they were getting involved in lots of different circles and doing lots of different things. So this was okay for me. It wasn't amazing, it was fine. I'm glad I read it and I found it interesting, but it didn't kind of change my life in the way that I think I was expecting it to. Next, I read My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite, and this was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction this year, which is why I picked it up. I feel like I don't have very much to say about this book, unfortunately, but that's because I read it so quickly, and I actually think I sped through it much quicker than I should have done because I was really enjoying it, and it does read, the chapters are very, very short. This is about a woman whose sister is periodically killing her lovers, and we open this book after she's just killed, I think, the third one. And it's getting to a point where her sister's was covering up for her, and she's starting to wonder what is going on here, because previously she'd thought that these men had been abusive and it was self-defense, but she's seeing a pattern. And it's very, I wouldn't say, it's not magical realism, because nothing magical is happening, but it's very odd situation that this family are finding themselves in. And I really liked this painting of her sister as this psychopath, essentially, who has no empathy for other people and is just living her own life. And the sister trying to protect that because they are family. It's a very interesting look on families and sisters and mothers, that kind of relationship, but also how men view women and the kind of power dynamics that you have in relationships, but also between like fathers and daughters. So I think the best praise I can give it is that I almost don't really know what to say because I read it so quickly, because I was enjoying it that much and I literally couldn't wait to keep reading it. Some bad news now, a book I did not finish, and that was Tentacle by Rita Indiana, and this is a tiny book and I still just could not be bothered. This was going to be a buddy read between me, Jen, Jean and Lauren, and I know Lauren started it and stopped it. I don't think Jen and Jean even began it actually. None of us could really be bothered with it. It's very, very difficult to read, and at first I thought I was going to absolutely love it, and then about halfway through I just thought this is just too much hard work and I can't be bothered. I don't even know where to start with explaining this book. It's so bizarre. It's set in a sort of not too distant future in Santo Domingo where something dreadful's happened, and we know that certain islands have been infected. There's something to do with the oceans and the ocean life all depleting, so things like anemones are very, very sacred. And there's a lot of violence, a lot of odd things happening. We meet this young girl who's working as a cleaner in this rich person's house, and that's only because she's previously been a prostitute. She's also transgender, and I say she because that's how she identifies at the beginning of the book, and then what she wants to do is get this drug which will turn her fully into a man, without having to undergo any surgery. So there's kind of this story happening there. And then there's also a bit of a flashback, I think, with this artist and stuff happening a few years before this weird apocalypse, but it's just bizarre. There's just so much violence and there's so much plot. It's just like plot flying at you, and I just couldn't put it all together. And I got about 70 pages in and I just thought, I don't understand what is happening. And it felt very sexual and very violent and very quite vulgar, but for kind of no real reason. Like it felt like the book itself wasn't necessarily handling these issues that well, and I thought it was going to be making more of a comment on things like gender and violence, but it just felt as if there wasn't enough explanation around what was actually happening, which meant it perhaps missed its mark and it went sort of too fast, too quick perhaps. But anyway, whatever, I just found it far too difficult and put it down for something a little bit more frivolous, which was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now this has, again, been everywhere, heard some amazing things about this book, and I did enjoy it, but I have some issues with it, I'm afraid. I hate not loving books that everybody else loves, but please. This is an imagined movie star, Evelyn Hugo, who's I think in her 70s or 80s. She's at the end of her life and she's asked this young journalist, Monique, to come and talk to her, and she's going to give her her entire life story, and Monique is going to turn it into a biography after Evelyn's dead. That's the kind of arrangement they come to at the beginning of the book. So we're going back, talking through each of Evelyn's seven husbands and getting the real story behind her life. As a premise, I really, really loved this. I really enjoyed hearing about Evelyn's life. It really reminded me of this podcast that I listened to called You Must Remember This by Karina Longworth. So if you subscribe to that that's really fun. And each episode, it looks at a specific, normally a forgotten person in the golden age of Hollywood, and just focuses on their whole career. So the story of Evelyn's life and career within this kind of fictionalized Hollywood, I really enjoyed, and I thought it was quite well researched as well, from what I know. That I noticed a couple of similarities between her and Joan Crawford's life. There's a couple of different little nods and winks that Taylor Jenkins Reid has done in there. So I really enjoyed that. What I did not like is the writing. Sounds so bad, but I thought the actual structure of the book was quite dreadful, and I'm really sorry. I feel like so many of the themes and the topics that she was trying to get in there were so heavy-handed and so in your face. I just wanted to be like, show me this, don't tell me this. Like, constantly so much exposition. And later on, I don't think this is a spoiler, and I don't think it should be a spoiler either, but Evelyn identifies as bisexual, so there are elements in this story, which I loved, by the way, of her having a relationship with a woman and that being covered up because of it being Hollywood and the time that it was. And but the way Evelyn's sexuality was handled, I felt was so sloppy, even to the point where Monique at one point says to Evelyn, "Oh, so you're gay then?" And Evelyn's like, "Don't try and put me in the box. I'm bisexual. I identify as bisexual, blah, blah, blah." And Monique's like, "Yes, she's so right. I tried to put a label on her, and really I should let her identify how she wants." I was just like, oh my God, like, please imply some things. Please let some things be implied. And this was constant as well, not even about those kind of topics. You also had Monique at different points in her life being like, "I thought this," and just like when Evelyn did this with her first husband, I thought I've done that exact thing in my life. And when Evelyn was strong enough to stand up to that person, I thought, oh well, I'll be brave in my life then. Like, everything was so spelled out for you, and it just got to the point where it really, really irritated me. And I didn't want to have anything to do with Monique. I just wanted to hear about Evelyn's story. I mean, even then, I do feel like there were several anachronistic handlings of Evelyn's story. I think it felt like, to me, Evelyn's perspective on her life felt very much to me like someone who was alive now and looking back on those times and picking out different parts of history that were important, like, for example, the Stonewall riots. Of course, Evelyn and her friends happened to be in New York at the exact day of the Stonewall riots so that they could have a little discussion about Stonewall. And I just feel like that's not... I don't know, because I wasn't alive then, but it feels like things that in hindsight are important were important in the actual time as well, the way Evelyn was looking back on her life. I just didn't believe Evelyn as an old woman who had lived through it. She felt like a very modern person transported into that time. I've done that classic thing where a book is very popular, and because I thought it was okay, because other people really love it, it's like I'm talking like it's dreadful, which it isn't. It was a really fun read, and I read it through really quickly, and I enjoyed the reading of it. It's just that there were issues in the writing which I found very, very irritating. So I wouldn't have given this like a 4 or 5 stars, but I still enjoyed reading it. So if you like the kind of old Hollywood stuff and you don't mind, you know, reading something really easy, this would be a perfect like poolside read, I think, if you were going on holiday. So I don't want to badmouth it, but it just wasn't the most literary experience. And finally, a book I really, really very much enjoyed, and it sounds like everyone else enjoyed as well because it won the Women's Prize of Fiction, and that is An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. This is about a black couple in America who the husband gets convicted of a crime he didn't commit just after they've got married. So about a year into their marriage, he gets put in prison, and it's about how they deal with that. Essentially, you get some letters back and forth while he's in prison, and then you see the aftermath and what's happened with their marriage when he comes out of prison. And I really enjoyed the writing. I really liked sort of the commentary on what was happening within society, but through the eyes of these two characters. Since starting to read it, Jen Campbell then said to me that this is a retelling, essentially, or a reimagining of If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin, which I haven't read and haven't seen the film of. So then when she said that, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So that's made me want to read If Beale Street Could Talk even more now, so that I can kind of compare the two of them, because I think even as a standalone book, even if you're not looking at it as a kind of reimagining or a reworking of something, it's still very, very powerful. And the kind of absolute brutality of what's happened to this man and to their marriage, it manages to really, like, you feel so emotionally involved. And I was almost so angry, like when I got to the point where he got put in prison, which is obviously right near the beginning of the book, I almost put the book down because I was like, I actually can't read it. I'm so upset that he's in prison. I was just like, I don't think I can read this because it's so unfair. And you get really involved in it without it feeling like a really violent book. And that's not to say I'm against violence in books if it's required, especially if it's handling a topic like this, which is the mass incarceration of black men in the US, and kind of how just by being black and just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, your entire life can be completely destroyed. That is a topic which is inherently quite violent and very painful subject. But what's very impressive and skillful in this book is that you feel all of that without the violence being explicit, and without it being like a harrowing read in and of itself, which some other books do and do very well, and some other books do, and you feel like the violence becomes a little bit unnecessary. And it's so skillful to make you understand and feel all of those feelings and feel so much empathy for characters which are very flawed and not very likeable, and you don't necessarily side with anyone in this book. It's just a very, very difficult situation that they're all in, and no one's really good and no one's really bad, and yet you just feel so torn and distraught because of what's happened to them all. So I would really recommend this. I'm very pleased that it won the Women's Prize for Fiction. I think I've read all of the shortlist apart from Milkman, so I think I might still read Milkman I'm not sure about it, but I'm really pleased I read this one, and I think it would have been for me between this one or Circe by Madeline Miller to win. So I'm very pleased that it did win. So that's me for May. I know this is late. I've already started reading books in June as well, but I thought I would save them for another video in a couple of weeks' time. I've just been very busy, classic YouTuber. Oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time to film, but I actually haven't. So that's fine. I think we can all forgive me, can't we? I would love to hear from you what you've been reading in this spring and summer, and especially if you have any comments on the books that I've mentioned in this video. And I'll see you next time. Bye.